Welcome to the ISTEP Plus Spring 2013 training. This is training for the Applied Skills ISTEP assessments that we'll be taking at the beginning of March, for the iRead 3 assessment that's at the beginning of March, and for the multiple choice ISTEP assessment that will be at the end of April, beginning of May. I'm Joy Goshert. I'm your Corporation Testing Coordinator. I am required to do this training with you to review the specifics of test administration. So some of this will be a review of what you did at the very start of the year, and then some of this will be more specifics to the actual test administration. I'm thankful to work in a district where we've had very few issues with ISTEP, and that is a tribute to you as educators, and I very much appreciate your professionalism. Obviously, you're required to follow the security test administration policies, or you could face disciplinary action. Assessment books and supplies are secure materials, and that's going to include the student login information that we'll use for computerized testing on the multiple choice assessment at the end of April, beginning of May. You can't duplicate materials, and you can't expose students to test questions prior to the actual assessment. Prior to the test window, so when I'm talking prior to the test window, I'm talking beginning of the school year up until now. And this is a review from what we did at the start of the year. It is acceptable to review with students standards and concepts that were taught in previous years, to incorporate English language arts and mathematics standards, review of those with other subject areas, to review assessment objectives as part of a general review of critical curricula, and to give students practice and test-taking skills. So when they actually take the assessment, we're assessing their knowledge and not their test-taking skills or lack thereof. But it's never appropriate to call students' attention to the fact that a similar question is on the assessment, or to use current, past, or parallel items as test preparation materials unless they've been released by the Indiana Department of Ed. And if they've been released by the Indiana Department of Ed, they're on the DOE website under ISTEP. And it's not appropriate to develop and use elaborate review materials. And we have asked that materials that you would use for review would be shared with your building principal, who would share those with me, and then that's followed by a decision as to use. That's a part of our Wawasee Community School Corporation State Assessment Test Security Policy that was shared with you at the beginning of the year. And it's not appropriate to set aside chunks of time to teach only the content and skill proficiencies that are measured on the assessment. Then, once the window opens, and the first assessment window is Monday, March 4th through Wednesday, March 13th. So when that window opens, it's not acceptable to teach test content that hadn't been previously covered. It's not acceptable to review standards and concepts with only those students who are going to be assessed. It's not acceptable to review only the Indiana academic standards that are tested on the assessment, or to review only those objectives on which students had previously performed poorly. And obviously it's not acceptable to make minor alterations to test items and use those materials for review or instruction. You will need to prepare your classroom by covering or removing from your room wall charts, visual aids, posters, graphic organizers, instructional materials that relate to specific content. So that includes multiplication tables, tables of mathematical facts or formulas, fraction equivalents, writing aids, punctuation charts, spelling or vocabulary list, and phonics charts. Really anything that a reasonable person might conclude would offer students in your classroom an unfair advantage over other students. And any materials that you would remove on your own if you were giving tests. Keep in mind that in grades 4 and 6, we're giving science tests along with the English language arts and math, and in grades 5 and 7, we're giving social studies tests along with English language arts and math. You are allowed to have an alphabet chart if it's letters only, and a number line if it's numbers only. You are going to be asked to sign out and back in your testing materials each day, and you're going to want to make sure the number of your materials matches each time. Test questions are not allowed to be reviewed by anyone other than the student during the test session. The exceptions obviously are when students have to have sections of the test read to them because of their IEP, ILP, or 504 plan. Students in grades 3, 4, and 5 have CDs available to them for that, but students in grades 6, 7, and 8 do not have CDs available. And then another exception is the iRead3 examiners manuals, which do have some of the questions in them, and that's why the iRead3 examiners manuals can be handed to teachers to look at, but then have to be turned in each day. So, for that very reason. Whereas for the applied skills ISTEP and the multiple choice ISTEP, you don't have to keep turning in your manuals each day, your examiner's manuals. Remember that they really hammered in the fall that specific test items cannot be discussed unless or until the item is released by the IDOE, and that's not until end of May when we get those applied skills results back. So during the testing window and from now until those are released, you can't, after a session, go to the teacher's lounge and sit down and talk about items that appeared on the test. You can't talk about them. You can't copy, reproduce, email, fax test items, and the DOE has even said not to do that to them. If we have to communicate with them about a specific test item, we do that via a reference to the item by content area, test session, and item number. Test examiners have to be Indiana licensed, so hold a Indiana teacher's license, Indiana administrator's license, or an Indiana school services license. Your role is to make sure you know your examiner's manual, you've studied it, you monitor the testing session to make sure students have an opportunity to succeed, and it's not acceptable for test examiners to leave the room, to read at the computer or a book or whatever, or to use or even to have a cell phone in the testing room, and that's pretty clear this year in the manuals, and obviously ignore what's happening in the room. A proctor, I hope many of you have proctors in the room with you. They are personnel who don't hold an Indiana license, but they can assist. And so before testing, they can help get the room ready, distribute materials, help get pulled manipulatives apart. At the beginning of the test, they should be introduced to the students if the students don't know who they are. During the test, they can help you as examiners be vigilant about knowing what's going on in the room. And at the end of testing, they can assist in collecting the test materials. During testing, examiners and proctors need to make sure students understand and follow instructions, are responding in the appropriate places on answer documents, and that students aren't exchanging answers or interfering with or distracting others, and are using only the permitted materials and devices. To prepare for testing, read your manual. The whole beginning has a number of sections: preparation by the examiner, use of highlighters, preparation of the students, use of proctors, testing cautions, invalidation, special accommodations, timing the assessments, calculator usage for grades 6 through 8, and then your general directions for applied skills and your general directions for multiple choice, and then obviously your specific directions for each test. And I would ask that you have reviewed all of that before you actually give an assessment. Know your symbols. A book with a line through it means it cannot be read to anyone, regardless of a student's IEP, Section 504 plan, or LEP plan. And I know the schedules that your principals give you are pretty clear on what can't be read at all. Know your testing schedule and follow it, and take care of your examiner's manual. It'll be used again during the second testing window, the multiple choice window. Materials students can't have in the testing room. They can't have cell phones. Applies to both students and adults. Students can't have pocket organizers, handheld computers, laptop computers, electronic writing pads, or pen input devices, unless that's an approved accommodation on their IEP. They can't have notebooks, textbooks, homework, magazines, newspapers, comic books. Students in grades 6 through 8 can have a calculator and use those on certain math assessments, so you'll want to follow your examiner's manual instructions for that. Students have to print their own names on their testing booklets, but they do not bubble. So make sure your students print their own names on testing booklets and don't bubble if they already have a label affixed to the book. This is an extra check to go along with barcode labels in case something would go wrong or be questioned, and it's also something that is in the student's own handwriting that is on the outside of the book. So have your students print their own names on their testing booklets. When you administer the test, it's never appropriate to coach students in any way to indicate that an answer is correct or incorrect or should be reconsidered. So you can't use facial expressions or gestures or body contortions of any kind to indicate that. You can't allow students to use any type of mechanical or technical devices unless that's in the test directions or unless that's an allowable testing accommodation for that student. You can't answer students' factual questions about test items or about vocabulary that's on the test. You can't read any parts of the test to students unless that's a part of their IEP 504 plan or individual learning plan. And if there's a book with a line through it, in no case can you read that to the student. Those are reading comprehension questions, regardless of the student's IEP 504 plan or individual learning plan. And you can't alter students' answers other than to check and erase stray marks or to darken answer bubbles after testing. And if you need to do that, our test security policy asks that you do that in the presence of a building administrator. And that is not because we don't trust you, it is for your protection so that you can't be accused of anything. You can redirect a student. You can refocus them if they appear to be daydreaming. If you've announced to the whole group of students at the start of the testing session that the answer booklet can be checked from time to time, then a student can be generally directed to double check the number of questions and the corresponding numbers, but you can't direct a student to a specific item. And you can redirect a student, any student, to check his or her work and make sure all of the questions have been answered and coded correctly on the response form if there's still time in the testing session. It is so important that you follow the corporation testing schedule. Make sure you are administering the correct test at the correct time. If you realize you have made an error, do not release your students from your classroom. Call your building's testing coordinator, and that's your principal, and find out what you should do. We do not want to end up in a situation where an entire grade level's tests have to be invalidated. You have to follow the schedule. If there is some sort of interruption, look at the clock and document the time so that you know, because you need to know how far into the test students were. So if there would be a fire evacuation or something, you would want to document what time it was when they left so that you know how much time is left on that assessment. There are instances where you would need to validate tests, and you'll use the form that's going to be given to you by your principal, and a sample is shown in the back of the examiner's manual. And the examiner's manual explains how to invalidate a test, so you'll want to read that section, and then you would give the completed form to your school's testing coordinator. Reasons to invalidate: maybe a student is random bubbling, or they proceeded to another test without permission. Now, if they just lost track and they've only made it to that first page, you would just take the test from them, and then you would allow them to finish the remaining items when all the students take that test. But if they've gone beyond that initial page, then you will have to invalidate the test. That's why it's so important that you're up and moving during testing. Illness during testing could be a reason to invalidate. Cheating. If you have a question, talk to your school's testing coordinator, and that's your principal. Accountability. Students' applied skills scores and their multiple choice scores are matched, brought together based upon the student's testing number. That's why we're so careful about STNs and making sure that they are accurate. And most students' that will be on their student's label on the test booklet. There are some students that we have to bubble all of that in. What I really wanted to point out here was that an undetermined score actually counts as not participating, as a student not participating. And an undetermined score can come if a student misses just one of that subject area's assessments from the applied skills portion and multiple choice portion combined, because they combine all of those language arts tests into that score. So just missing one session can have a student end up with an undetermined score. And I know that our teachers work very hard to get kids to complete tests, but I just wanted you to know for sure that if a student kind of freaks out and refuses to finish, that will end up as an undetermined score for that particular subject area, whether it's English language arts or math or whatever. And so I know you work very hard, but I want you to really do your best to get kids to complete every test session. And we really have to keep an account for every student who's not tested. So if you have a situation where a student kind of freaks out and doesn't get something completed, you need to document that and give that to your testing coordinator, which is your principal. When students finish early, they can review that test and that test only. When they close their testing booklet, then they can read a hardback or paperback book that's been reviewed or approved by you as the examiner. We don't want them doing homework or reading a textbook or magazine or newspaper or comic book. Don't leave your classroom while students are in the room and testing materials are not locked away. Always lock your classroom when leaving it during breaks, and materials should always be returned to the central secure testing area for your school and locked away when testing is not in session. Violation of test security is you can't give students access to test questions. You can't copy or reproduce any test items. You can't discuss or share specific items unless and until the item is released by the IDOE. You have to follow what's in the examiner's manual. You can't make answer keys available to students. It's a violation to participate in, direct, aid, counsel, assist, encourage, or fail to report any of the acts prohibited in this section. And you can't score students' responses before they get returned to CTB. If you know that somebody has violated or that there's been a security violation, you need to report that violation to your building principal or to me. And there is a form called Testing Concerns and Security Violations Reporting Form that you can complete and give that to your building principal, or if it involves someone at that level, then you would give that to me. Be vigilant. Guard your testing documents. Be up and observing the students in your classroom, and count your testing items when you receive them and before you return them. And you will sign in and out those materials each day. I know that you guys will do a great job with the testing. The other thing I would say is really build your kids up and encourage them and make them feel like, yes, we're ready for this, we can do this, we're going to do a great job. Thank you.